Special Counsel Jack Smith is now going after the false electors, or the fake electors, as they call them, the alternative slate of electors that were being contemplated in the 2020 election. And he's here in Arizona coming after Secretary of States and other representatives who may have been involved in the conversations. You see Jack Smith here. Donald Trump had an interesting comment about him, and Christie is reacting to that comment. But we're going to go through the story about what's happening in Arizona and then see specifically what this guy, Rusty Bowers, which you may have remembered from the election. He was somebody who was in the news a lot here in phone calls about what was happening in Arizona as this conversation was happening about alternative slates of electors and whether the legislature could take back the outcome of the election and vote on an alternative ballot for the Electoral College. So this is Rusty Bowers. We'll hear from him in a minute. But a little bit of background on the subpoenas that went out from Jack Smith's office to Arizona. This comes over from Axios. They tell us that Jack Smith subpoenaed the Arizona Secretary of State's office recently over Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. That led to the insurrection, they say. They say Biden won Arizona by 10,000 votes. That's what they say. It was a focal point of the Trump campaign and its Republican allies who filed multiple lawsuits. Washington Post reported that Trump in 2020 attempted to pressure Arizona Governor Doug Ducey to overturn the presidential election results by finding fraudulent votes. Also, apparently, told Mike Pence to call Ducey and convince him. And there were other people like Paul Smith, a spokesman for the Secretary of State called Adrian Fontes, who's our current Secretary of State, said that the office got 2 subpoenas from Smith. Wonder what he was asking for. One during the current administration and one in the previous, when guess what? When Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs was the Secretary of State. Isn't it amazing? Katie Hobbs was running the show when Arizona conveniently went over to Joe Biden. Shock. And then when Katie Hobbs runs for office, she wins against Kari Lake. Amazing. Even though she was running the office at the time of both elections. Now she's the governor, and now they're subpoenaing Adrian Fontes. And so we've got a whole institution of people who are just, I imagine, just bending over backwards to give Jack Smith whatever he wants to serve whatever narrative they're working together to create. So, article says, he said that the office complied with the subpoena it received during the current administration through its law firm. The subpoena sought information about lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign and the Arizona Republican Party chair that contested the election. Other officials said that they faced pressure from Trump. And we're going to listen to Rusty Bowers. And it's not a good interview, but Rudy Giuliani was also a part of this. And apparently Rusty got a direct phone call from Trump. So we'll see if he is called as a witness to testify. Smith is also investigating Trump's handling of classified documents. A grand jury indicted Trump with over a dozen federal charges related to obstruction and classified info. Of course, we know Trump pleaded not guilty to those charges. So Arizona is now getting subpoenas. And we have this guy, Rusty Bowers, who was here in Arizona and one of the people who was getting those phone calls from Giuliani and from Trump. And he was on with Caitlin Collins from CNN. And he gave this interview where he articulates some of what happened during those phone calls. And this might be actual witness type testimony that we see in a trial if this guy is called by Jack Smith to testify against Donald Trump. And it very well may be the case because we're talking about pressure, coercion, trying to do things illegal, saying that people are telling him no, but he's putting the pressure on them to coerce them to do things. This is Rusty Bowers. This is what it sounds like.
Have you been subpoenaed by the special counsel?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm hesitant to talk about any subpoenas, etc., but I have been interviewed by the FBI.
In the effort to overturn the election results.
Correct. It was 4 hours of a discussion that they had with me. Very professional.
When was that interview?
It was couple of months ago, 3 months ago, about the same time frame, actually.
Can you tell us what you talked about? I mean, this is news. We did not know that you had spoken to Jack Smith's team. Can you talk about what you offered to them? What information?
I offered them nothing new. They seemed to have a good grasp on all of the testimony that I'd given.
And Bowers had spoken at the January 6th Fake Select Committee garbage hearings. They brought him in to testify, and a lot of that was really monotonous and most of the same, but they got a lot of his testimony and they're just corroborating it with him here.
And all of the interviews that I had given to the Arizona Republic and people from the Washington Post, they were very aware of the January 6th committee testimony that I gave. There may have been something that I said that was of interest, but I don't remember anything standing out that had not been mentioned before.
Did you turn over any documents to them?
That I don't remember. I know I gave a lot of documents to my attorney, and I still have a lot of documents, but I don't know if they're important or not. I have the proof, whatever that meant. That was the proof that I'd asked for, but it was hardly the proof that I sought.
What kind of documents was it?
The players with the Trump administration I want the names of all of the illegal aliens. I want the names of all of the dead people. I want the names of all of the service people who had their documents stolen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, we've got them. We'll give them to you. I said, that's the proof I need in order to have any semblance of the necessary threshold that you do something this big. Now, we're talking now, a year and a half ago or more? And that never came. But I did finally get what they considered proof, and it was a couple of letters from legal professors. It was a term paper from one of my colleagues on this theory of law. It was several things that were entertaining, and a bunch of tear sheets for ballots, wherein the ballot entries and exits of the ballots in their 200 ballot lots came into the elections officials. There was no names, nothing else. And so I tongue squarely in my cheek. I say it's the proof.
So just coming up for air for a second on this, Caitlin Collins was asking him about what documents he turned over to special counsel. Wait a minute, you talked to them? Wait a minute, for 4 hours? What? And what documents did you give them? We had no idea about this. But he starts answering a different question. He's answering what documents he wanted to get from Trump's team. So it's a little bit confusing. He's telling Trump's team, okay, if you're saying that there was a problem in our election, I need the illegals. I need the deads. I need the double votes. I need the names of the people to show that there's a margin between the 10,000 votes that Joe Biden is up by, allegedly, in order to do something about this. And so then now he's explaining that the documents that they got, Trump said, we got the proof. They got the documents over. That's sent over to him. Okay. Well, none of that sounds illegal. I don't know what the problem with any of that is, right? These are phone calls between election campaigns and different secretaries of state, different representatives, different people in the different states. I'd imagine this happens in every single campaign in every election ever. So once again, I don't find this to be problematic. Now, this is going to go on a little bit, including with phone calls from Trump, and we've got questions about those calls and whether they were recorded and what was actually said there. He's not going to get into that for us. But you're allowed to have conversations about elections. You're allowed to make phone calls. That in and of itself, in my mind, doesn't cross to obstruction. Otherwise, every single politician who's ever called anybody in their local government about an election would also be crossing that line, no? This is the point, is you're allowed in an adversarial system to push the line. You're allowed to ask your lawyer questions like, what if I say those drugs weren't mine? What if I say those documents aren't here? You're allowed to explore these things. But let's continue.
And that's all the proof I ever got.
I'm assuming they also asked you about that phone call with Trump and Giuliani directly, where you said, they called you after you had left church one day and were basically asking you to do things you said you couldn't do.
This is where we might get into that
That's
coercion.
Correct. They did. We went over that briefly. We went over the next call. He called me twice. The second time only from Trump.
Second call was a Trump call.
And none of those bore resemblance to what he said I said in that email before the January 6th commission. But I guess he's a free citizen of the empire. He can say what he wants.
Given they asked you about Trump, is it clear to you that this investigation is focused directly on the former president? Or what sense did you get of the direction of that investigation?
I think it's broad because there's a lot of information about attorneys that worked with them, about Mr. Giuliani that made the calls and visited us, and other members of his team, who they were, when the meetings were, what was discussed in those meetings or in that meeting. And so I presume that all of them are involved.
Wow.
How that shakes out as threshold evidence, I don't know. I just dabble with a paintbrush. But
we've heard that they were looking at other attorneys. Did they ask you about Sidney Powell, Kenneth Cheeseborough, any of these other attorneys that we know that had been a focus of Jack Smith, something they've been looking into?
Mr. Eastman.
John Eastman.
Was that we mentioned specifically. I don't know if Mr. Epstein is an attorney, but he also called, and I believe we discussed his phone call to me later, much later.
Can you refresh our memory on the call? Because you're talking about Boris Epstein, who is someone who is still often seen with Trump. He was in court with Trump in New York when he got indicted here in Manhattan. Can you remind us the nature of that call that he had to you?
There was a bill that one of my former colleagues, Mr. Fincham, had introduced into the legislature that he wanted me to hear, and it would take the ballot outcome of the 2020 election and put that outcome on the ballot for the people of Arizona to vote on, whether they still felt that way or not. If they voted against that election, then it would be thrown out. That was the essence of this bill. And I said, I'm not going to hear that. Well, let's just say I won't hear that bill. And Mr. Epstein was trying to convince me that that was a good bill and that I should do it. And we had he had 5 or 6 shots at trying to find a pivot that he could get me to accept that it was a good idea. None of them were good ideas.
Okay, so again, that's just generic lobbying. You're allowed to say, hey, Arizona and the Arizona public, the people who vote here, which is yours truly, including, we have our doubts about the election. We don't think it was conducted properly, and we would like a referendum on this, and we want the legislature to pass a bill. All right, you might say that's a long shot, and maybe nobody's going to do it, and maybe you say it's a boneheaded idea. And you might say it's undemocratic, and you might say it's a bunch of things. But it's just a suggestion to pass a bill that would go through the normal procedures that would then allow the American populace to vote if it was a good idea. And if that's what the Arizonan people really wanted, then he would just submit it and it would go through the formal things. And he says it's a dumb idea, which again happens, I would imagine, all the time. I would imagine every single day the politicians across this country get phone calls. Hey, you want to build this bridge somewhere? You want to do this thing or license this thing or what? They say, no. I'm like, no, I can't do this for you or that for you or whatever. No, nice idea. Try again. But that's not criminal. I mean, unless it's Donald Trump, of course, because everything he does is criminal, including apparently leaving dime bags at Hunter's crack party.
And I wouldn't do it. But that was our conversation, was just to support the Fincham effort, and I would not do that.
Okay.
I have a little more respect for what I do than that.
Did you see that as him pressuring you?
Him being Epstein?
Yes.
He never threatened me in the least.
There you go.
Asking, he said, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And finally I said, Mr. Epstein, we're big kids. I'm not going to do this.
Okay.
I'm not going to.
There you go.
He said, well, if I can get you the proof, will you? I said, I've been promised that proof for going on 2 years now.
Great.
You suddenly have it? And he said, yeah, I got it. We can get it to you. I said, well, you put that on my desk in the next 3 days. That would be an interesting piece of pile to see. Make sure it's what I asked for, type of thing. And when I told you what I got, it was some committee testimony from Congress.
Yeah, so they say, we'll send you the proof. They don't actually have much more that he wants to see. They send him some more stuff. Nothing happens. But no threats.
Paper,
no
couple
threats,
of letters,
no coercion.
And a bunch of tear sheets, all of which didn't prove anything. Proved that there were tear sheets, proved that somebody had a hearing, but not the proof you need for doing something so incredible as what we were faced with.
Do you think what Rudy Giuliani, Boris Epstein, any of these other attorneys, do you think what they did rises to the level of criminal behavior in your view?
That's above my pay grade. I don't decide what's criminal or not.
Do you feel like a victim?
I think America can decide and will.
I think he's right. They will charge him.
They did, in fact. And they may do it again.
You hope it doesn't go that far?
Sure, I do.
Charges or election?
We learned today that Trump has raised $35 million in the second quarter. It's basically double what he raised in the first quarter.
Hurt for them.
Obviously, his legal troubles are piling up.
Yikes,
He's still claiming he won an election that he lost. You say he effectively ended your political career. Does he deserve the GOP nomination? And if he gets it, would you vote for him?
Oh, I've already made very clear about that last point. Very clear. The oval next to his name will never be filled on my ballot. And that's up to the party. If they think that that's what they have to do, then they are effectively throwing away a whole bunch of votes that will not
go to Trump, he says. All right, so you can see, all right, not a fan of Trump. And all the way up until that end there, it really, well, even this entire interview, he talks a lot about phone calls and about some efforts to introduce legal efforts, like legal maneuvers, legal bills, legal statutes, do legal things. Never felt threatened, never felt coerced. Not a fan of Trump, though. Not going to be supporting him again. So do we think that his testimony when he sat for 4 hours with the special counsel was good or bad for Trump? Even though in this interview, we don't identify any criminal conduct other than phone calls and simple lobbying and informational calls and alternative paths forward during an election. which I guarantee you, if you go back and look at what Hillary did on, let's say, election night 2016, I would bet that her team was making a bunch of frantic phone calls, calling everybody, Wisconsin and so on. Are you sure? There's not this, there's not that. I would guarantee you that there are calls. But she doesn't get charged for election obstruction or other things or smashing her server or her classified documents with a hammer. So Rusty Bowers not voting for Trump, but all right, I still don't think that he's really identified any criminal conduct there. So why is the special counsel subpoenaing him and other people in Arizona, including the Secretary of State? Why? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Some people say that sometimes when people are not making sense, it might be because there's something wrong with them, or they might be on crack. That's what Donald Trump says. Here's what he posted on True Social. He said, "Does anybody really believe that the cocaine found in the White House, in the West Wing of the White House, very close to the Oval Office, is for the use of anyone other than Hunter and Joe? But watch, the fake news media will start soon saying that the amount found was very small, and it wasn't really cocaine, but rather common ground-up aspirin, and the story will vanish. Has deranged Jack Smith, the crazy Trump-hating prosecutor, been seen in the area of the cocaine? He looks like a crackhead to me." That's Trump. You know, it's just a wild scene. There's not often times where you recommend your defendant call the prosecuting attorney crackheads. You know, it's not generally advisable. I know how you feel about this prosecutor, but don't call him names. But this is not the ordinary prosecution. Trump is waging a battle in the court of public opinion. Why? Because the courts of law are corrupted. So he's going to be laying on more of this. And does it really matter? Not legally, but in terms of personal animosity, you better believe it. Jake Tapper was hoping Chris Christie would give him a different answer. He's like, can we charge Trump for that truth? Can we charge him with hurting Jack Smith's feelings under U.S. code? No, Jake, you can't do it. It's not advisable to call a prosecutor names as a general rule, but as a general rule, there's only one Trump, and this is a historical prosecution, and he does kind of look like a crackhead.
Mr. Trump is now calling Special Counsel Jack Smith a, quote, deranged man who, quote, looks like a crackhead. Beyond the propriety of that, from a legal point of view, do statements like that affect the case?
No, I mean, not really. I think, the only argument you could make is that it potentially affects a jury pool who's in South Florida reading this stuff and thinking,
no, you just say,
look
at him.
What the hell is he talking about?
Look at him, man.
I did a lot of drug cases when I was U.S. attorney.
You did a lot of drugs?
In New Jersey. I can guarantee people that there isn't one particular type of crackhead. There's not anyone who looks like a crackhead necessarily. Look, this is just what makes Donald Trump an unacceptable nominee for our party.
I don't know.
Because he says things like this without any regard for truth or falsity, without any regard for the propriety of it. But even...
Chris, you just admitted crackheads are very unique looking. Crackheads come in all shapes and sizes, my man. So Trump could be true. It could be right. We don't know.
Worse yet, what does that do to help anyone other than him? My argument all along has been this race in 2024 for Donald Trump is all about Donald Trump. It's not about the American people. It doesn't give a damn about the American people.
Well, he doesn't want crackheads running the country, like apparently is happening in the White House and the special counsel's office. So we'll continue to see what happens here in Arizona and elsewhere. But Jack Smith is really going after these alternative electors, these false electors, and the prosecution is going to continue to heat up. As Rusty Bowers says, he thinks it might extend into other people, including Trump's lawyers. And of course, we'll continue to cover, my friends. Thank you, as always, for subscribing, and thank you for inviting somebody else to come over and check out our channel and join us as we go live and cover all of this news and more.